an old woman now, and sometimes I feel like I have lived for centuries, carrying the weight of memories no heart should ever bear. My bones ache, my hair has turned the color of snow, but my heart, it still remembers. It remembers love, betrayal, laughter, and tears. And today, I want to tell you about the day my own son, the boy I carried in my arms and nursed with my milk, came to my home with his wife and a truck. A truck not to bring me gifts, not to surprise me with joy, but to strip away what little comfort I had left in my own old age. I remember it as clearly as if it happened just this morning. The air was heavy with the smell of summer, and the cicadas outside hummed in the trees. I was sitting in my small kitchen, sipping tea from a cracked cup, the same cup I had used for over 20 years. My little radio was playing softly in the background, an old country song that reminded me of days when my house was full of voices, of children running, of laughter echoing off the walls. That house used to feel alive. Now it felt like a museum of loneliness. I had grown used to silence, you see. Since my husband passed away, the walls had been my only companions. Every creak of the wooden floor sounded louder. Every ticking of the old clock pressed deeper into my chest. And yet, I kept living because that's what grandmothers do, we endure. So when I heard a truck pull up outside my home that afternoon, my heart jumped with a flicker of hope. Maybe my son had come to visit. Maybe he wanted to check on me. Maybe he remembered his mother who sacrificed so much for him. I hurried to the window, leaning on the sill with my trembling hands, and yes, there it was, a big noisy truck. And stepping out of it, my son and his wife. For a moment my heart was light. I whispered to myself, oh thank God, they remembered me today. I smoothed down my dress, wiped the corners of my eyes, and opened the door with the biggest smile I could find. But the look on their faces, it wasn't the look of children happy to see their mother. My daughter-in-law barely glanced at me, her lips curled in a smirk, and my son didn't hug me. He didn't even say, hello, Mama. He brushed past me like I was a stranger standing in his way. They didn't sit down. They didn't ask me how I was doing. Instead, my daughter-in-law clapped her hands and said, all right, let's start with the kitchen appliances first. Then we'll move to the living room. I froze. My smile faded. What do you mean? I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't even answer me. My son turned his eyes away from mine, and with a cold, heavy tone he said, we need these things more than you do. You live alone. You don't need all of this. And just like that, they started unplugging my refrigerator. I stood there, my body shaking as I watched them. My refrigerator wasn't just a machine to me. It was filled with the little things I had saved, the leftovers I carefully stored so nothing would go to waste. It held the jars of jam I had made with my own hands, the milk for my tea, the bread I kept for the mornings. They rolled it out as if it meant nothing, as if I meant nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my son's hand and ask him, don't you remember the nights I stayed awake when you had a fever? Don't you remember the times I went hungry just so you could eat? But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood silent, my heart breaking with every appliance they touched. The microwave, the toaster, the washing machine, all gone. My daughter-in-law laughed as she directed the men who came with the truck. Take that too. She won't even notice it's gone, she said. Her laughter cut into me like a knife. Do you know what it feels like when your own child treats you like a burden? When the boy you once called your pride and joy looks at you like you're nothing more than an obstacle. Tell me, my dear, how old are you? Have you ever seen someone you love turn their back on you? Because if you have, then you know exactly how deep this pain cuts. I wanted to stop them. I wanted to shout. But instead I felt my knees grow weak, and I sank into a chair, clutching the arms for strength. They didn't even notice my tears. They just kept working, moving through the house like vultures, stripping away piece by piece the little life I had left. My son avoided my eyes the entire time, and I wondered, was he ashamed? Or had his heart turned so cold that even his mother's tears could no longer reach him? At one point I whispered, son, please, leave me something. Leave me just a little. My voice cracked as I said it. He paused for a moment, his back to me, but he didn't turn around. My daughter-in-law snorted and said, don't worry, Mom, we'll leave you the old rocking chair. You can sit in it and think about the past. Then she laughed again. That laugh, it will haunt me forever. By the time they finished, my house looked empty, hollow. The hum of the refrigerator was gone. The washing machine's corner stood bare. And the shelves felt naked. My little home, once filled with things that made life manageable for me, had been stripped away in less than 2 hours. And when the truck pulled away, leaving me sitting in the silence, I felt something inside me break. But let me tell you, that day was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning. Because sometimes when people push you down to the ground, they forget that even the weakest heart can find the strength to rise again. When the truck disappeared down the road, carrying away the pieces of my life, the silence that returned to my house was unbearable. It was not the usual silence of an old widow's home, but a hollow emptiness that pressed against my chest like a stone. I walked slowly through the rooms, touching the bare spaces where my appliances had once stood. My fingers trailed across the dust rings left behind, the outlines of what used to be my refrigerator, my washer, my microwave. All gone. I sank into my rocking chair, the one thing they had left behind. My daughter-in-law's words echoed in my ears. You can sit in it and think about the past. And so I did. But as I rocked back and forth, my thoughts weren't only about the past. They were about the betrayal that had just happened. You see, dear one, I never thought it would come to this. I gave my son everything I could. When he was little, we didn't have much money, but I worked extra shifts, skipped meals, and wore old shoes just so he could have what he needed. I told myself, someday he will understand. Someday, he will look after me the way I looked after him. Isn't that what we mothers hope for? That our children will remember the sacrifices? But as I sat there in that empty house, I realized something painful. Sometimes the ones you love the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound of the refrigerator being dragged away, the laughter of my daughter-in-law, the silence of my son. I stared at the ceiling until the dawn broke, and with it came a decision. I was not going to let this be the end of me. The next morning, I dressed in my old blue sweater, the one my late husband used to say made my eyes look brighter, and I walked to town. My steps were slow, my knees ached, but my heart burned with determination. I went to the community center, a place I hadn't visited in years. They had a small gathering of seniors, and I thought perhaps talking to someone would ease my pain. When I arrived, a few familiar faces looked up and smiled. Well, if it isn't Mary, they said. We haven't seen you in so long. I forced a smile and sat down. I listened to their chatter about grandchildren, about recipes, about the weather. And all the while I held my secret inside me, the weight of betrayal pressing on my heart. Finally, one of the women, kind old Helen, leaned over and asked, Mary, are you all right? You look troubled. And just like that, the words came spilling out. I told them what had happened, the truck, the appliances, the laughter. When I finished, there was a silence in the room. Helen shook her head, her eyes full of sorrow. How could they do that to you? She whispered. I shrugged, tears stinging my eyes. Because I let them, I said softly. That day, something strange happened. Instead of pity, I received strength. Those women, those fellow grandmothers and mothers, they rallied around me. You're not alone, Helen said. You still have us. And though their comfort didn't replace the love I had lost from my son, it gave me a flicker of hope. When I returned home that evening, the house still felt empty, but I no longer felt quite as alone. I sat in my rocking chair, closed my eyes and whispered to myself, You will not be broken. Not yet. The days that followed were hard. Without my appliances, even small tasks became difficult. Washing clothes by hand, storing food without a refrigerator, it was exhausting. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered the way my daughter-in-law laughed, and I told myself, I will not let her win. I will not let my son think he can treat me like I am nothing. One evening, as I sat with a candle flickering beside me, I asked myself a question I want to ask you now. If you were in my place, abandoned by your own blood, would you forgive them or would you fight back? I knew my answer. I would fight back. But not with anger, not with shouting, not with violence. No. I would fight back with dignity, with quiet strength, with the one thing they could never take away from me, my spirit. I began writing in a notebook, pouring out my memories. The nights I held my son when he was sick. The sacrifices I made. The love I gave freely. Page after page I wrote until my hands ached. And when I looked at those pages, I realized something. This wasn't just my story. This was the story of so many mothers, so many grandmothers, who gave everything only to be left with nothing. I decided then I would share my story, not to shame my son, but to remind the world that mothers matter. that grandmothers matter, that we are not invisible, even when our children forget us. And so, my dear, I sit here tonight telling you this. Not because I want your pity, but because I want your ears, your heart. Listen to me carefully. Love your mother, respect your grandmother, because one day when the tables turn, you may find yourself longing for the very person you pushed away. The nights grew longer after that day. Every creak of the house seemed louder. Every shadow seemed heavier. Without the hum of the refrigerator or the whirl of the washer, the silence became a cruel companion. I would sit in my rocking chair with the candlelight flickering beside me, my pen scratching across the paper as I poured out my story. Page after page, memory after memory, I wrote until my hand cramped. I remembered the time my son was 5 years old and came home crying because another boy had broken his toy. I held him in my arms, whispering that I would always protect him. I remembered the nights he fell sick, when I pressed cool cloths to his forehead while praying he would be spared from fever. I remembered the mornings when I skipped my own breakfast just so he would have enough food for school. Every sacrifice, every act of love. I remembered them all. And now those memories felt like thorns pressing into my heart. Why, I asked myself, why do children forget? Why do they grow and let their hearts grow cold toward the very hands that raised them? One afternoon, as I sat on my porch with that notebook on my lap, a young neighbor passed by. She was only about 16, carrying her school books. She stopped and waved at me. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Mary," she called. Her voice was bright, her smile warm. I waved back. "Good afternoon, dear." She walked closer, curiosity in her eyes. "What are you writing?" she asked. I hesitated, then handed her the notebook. She skimmed through a few pages, her eyes widening. This is powerful," she said softly. "It's so sad, but it's so real." Her words touched me. That a young girl could see the truth in my pain, it meant something. She handed the notebook back gently, as though it were made of glass. "You should share this with the world," she told me. I chuckled sadly. Who would listen to an old woman like me? She looked straight into my eyes and said, "Everyone should." That night I thought about her words. Maybe, just maybe, my story could mean more than my sorrow. Maybe it could become a voice for all the mothers and grandmothers who were too afraid or too broken to speak. The next Sunday I went to church. I had avoided it for weeks, ashamed of what had happened, embarrassed by the emptiness of my home. But when I walked through those doors, the familiar hymns wrapped around me like a blanket. People greeted me with smiles, and though I could see the questions in their eyes, no one asked. They simply welcomed me back. After the service, I approached the pastor. He was a kind man, always patient, always listening. I told him my story, haltingly at first, then with all the force of my broken heart. His face grew heavy with sorrow as he listened. When I finished, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Mary, your pain has a purpose. God has given you this story so you can be a light for others." Those words stayed with me. A light. Could I really be that, after being abandoned, stripped of my dignity, treated like I was nothing? That evening, I opened my notebook again and began to write not just for myself but for others. I wrote with the thought that somewhere out there, another mother might be crying silently because her children had forgotten her. Somewhere out there, a grandmother might be sitting alone, wondering if she mattered. And maybe, just maybe, my story could reach her heart and remind her she was not alone. But even as I found this new purpose, the wound inside me did not heal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that truck. I heard my daughter-in-law's cruel laugh. I saw the way my son couldn't meet my eyes. And I wondered what would happen the next time they came. Would they take more? Would they take what little I had left? One night, as the wind rattled the windows and the candle flickered weakly, I asked myself, what would you do if your own child came not to love you, but to strip you of everything? Would you still open the door? Would you still call him your son? I wrestled with that question for hours. In the end, I whispered to the empty room, "Yes, he is still my son. But I will no longer be their victim." Strength began to grow inside me, not the kind of strength that roars, but the kind that stands steady like an old oak tree, weathered by storms yet unbroken. I began preparing. Slowly, quietly. I started locking things away, selling a few old belongings so I could save some money. I didn't tell anyone. It was my secret. My son and his wife thought they had stripped me bare. But they didn't know the depth of a mother's will to survive. And in those quiet nights, rocking back and forth with the candlelight dancing on the walls, I promised myself one thing. The next time they tried to take from me, they would not find me weak. They thought I was powerless. They thought age had made me useless. But they forgot something. A mother never truly forgets how to protect herself. The days passed slowly, each one like a test of my endurance. My house, though emptier than before, began to feel less like a place of loss and more like a fortress of quiet strength. I had been broken, yes, but not destroyed. The rocking chair creaked beneath me each evening as I wrote, as I thought, as I planned. I realized something powerful. They had taken my appliances, but they had not taken my spirit. They had not taken my voice. Then one gray afternoon I heard it again. The sound of a truck rumbling down the road. My heart clenched. I rose slowly, peering out through the thin lace curtain. And there they were. My son. My daughter-in-law. Coming back just as I feared. I stood frozen for a moment. My hands trembled, but then I remembered my promise. I would not be weak this time. The knock on the door was loud, demanding. "Mama, open up," my son called. His voice carried no warmth, only command. I opened the door, but instead of smiling, instead of stepping aside, I stood tall, well, as tall as my weary bones would allow. "What are you here for?" I asked. My voice was steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. "We need more things," my daughter-in-law said bluntly, brushing past me. "That old cabinet, the TV, the rest of the kitchen stuff. It's all just sitting here wasted." I stepped in her way. For the first time, I didn't move aside like a shadow. I blocked her path. "No," I said firmly. They both looked at me in surprise. My son's brows furrowed. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean," I said, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. "You will not take another thing from this house. You came once and stripped me bare. You took the comfort of my old age and turned it into emptiness. But this house, what little is left in it, is mine. You will not take another thing." My daughter-in-law laughed. That cruel laugh I had heard before. "You? Stop us." I looked directly into her eyes, then into my son's. "Yes, me. I may be old. I may be weak in body, but I am still your mother. And I will not let you treat me like dirt beneath your shoes." For the first time my son hesitated. He looked at me, really looked at me, as though suddenly seeing the strength in my frail body, the fire in my tired eyes. But his wife sneered and pushed past him. "Don't listen to her. She can't stop us." I turned, grabbed my walking stick from beside the door, and slammed it against the wooden floor with a force I didn't know I had. The sound echoed through the house like thunder. "Out!" I shouted. "Out of my house!" For a moment the air stood still. My son's eyes widened. He had never heard me raise my voice like that. Not once in his entire life. His wife's mouth hung open in disbelief. "Are you serious? You can't treat us this way." "Can't I?" I whispered, stepping closer, pointing my trembling finger. "I fed you. I clothed you. I gave you life. And you repaid me with betrayal. But hear me now, if you take one more step in this house, I will call the police. I may be your mother, but I am not your victim." The room was silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. Finally, my son lowered his eyes. He tugged at his wife's arm. "Let's go," he muttered. She jerked her arm away. "What? Are you crazy? We came here for—" "I said let's go," he repeated, his voice harder this time. And for once he didn't look like her puppet. He looked ashamed. Reluctantly, she huffed and stormed out the door, muttering curses under her breath. My son lingered for just a moment longer. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen in years: guilt. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Then he turned and followed her to the truck. The engine roared to life, and within minutes they were gone again. But this time I didn't collapse into my chair in tears. I didn't sit in silence with my head bowed low. Instead I stood tall, holding onto my walking stick, my heart pounding with victory. They hadn't taken anything this time. They hadn't broken me this time. Later that evening, I sat in my rocking chair once more. The candlelight glowed softly, and my notebook lay open in my lap. I wrote about what had just happened, about the power I had found in standing up for myself. And as I wrote, tears of a different kind fell. Tears not of sorrow but of strength. You see, my dear, there comes a time in every life when you must choose. Will you let others define you? Or will you rise and define yourself? I chose to rise. I don't know what the future holds for my son. Maybe one day he will return, not with a truck, but with a heart full of regret. Maybe he won't. But I cannot wait for his change to find my peace. My peace must come from within. And so tonight I tell you this story not as a woman who lost everything, but as a woman who discovered something far greater. I discovered that even in old age, even in heartbreak, you can find strength you never knew you had. So let me ask you, listening to me now, if life stripped you bare, if even your own blood betrayed you, would you let it break you? Or would you rise like I did with whatever strength you have left, and claim your dignity? Because I am an old woman, yes. My hair is white, my hands are wrinkled, my steps are slow. But inside me beats the heart of someone who has survived storms that would have destroyed others. And I will not be silenced. I will not be forgotten. This is my story. And perhaps in hearing it, you will remember to hold your loved ones closer, to treat your parents and grandparents with the respect they deserve. Because one day when you grow old, you may find yourself longing for the very hands you once pushed away.